This is your World War III emergency update. I got some bad news. I was right again. I've been warning you since the start that it doesn't matter who's in the White House. This war between NATO and Russia is destined to escalate. Counter to many of the alt media grifters out there who just basically promulgate any contrarian viewpoint that is in vogue at the time in order to get clicks, I've been, to my own detriment, saying the truth since the start that regardless of whatever sort of false promises are made by the Trump administration, the neocon mask is eventually going to come off, and this week it has. We are now at a critical juncture in this conflict. What you're looking at behind me here is one of the many attacks on Russia last night. 337 drones were reportedly intercepted by Russian air defense. An unknown amount actually made it to their targets. This was far and away the biggest drone attack since the war began, and one of the most successful, optically speaking, from the Ukrainian point of view since it began. Now, presumably, the Ukrainians did not have access to the Western ISR, which would have had accommodated and facilitated the use of these drones in this way to do these deep strikes, which would, of course, require satellite data. It would require some way to steer these drones once they were beyond enemy lines. There is various AI technologies that can be leveraged, but we must presume that they had the green light from the West in order to do this. Now, it's important to understand that, let's just look at the setup here, okay? Because this all happened on the eve of these peace talks that now Zelensky has agreed to. He signed the country's life away, whatever that means, to NATO. He signed on the dotted line. Now Trump gets to, at least for a short period of time, appear magnanimous, and Putin could potentially appear aggressive or unaccommodating if he does not agree to a ceasefire, which by all accounts he is likely not going to, because this is something which he has always said precludes any sort of negotiation, in that they expect that they're going to halt the lines where they currently are, and that Ukraine, who is now getting weapons shipments again and satellite and intelligence data once again, all of which has now recommenced miraculously after a massive supposed fallout in the White House, which I'm pretty sure now at this point in time was purely just a facade. Because throughout this entire period, I've been saying that the weapon shipments aren't going to stop, and I even distinctly said a few days ago that I got word that they were still actually happening, and that a lot of this was just theatrics, and the Russians are not going to be fooled by it. Understand that Mike Waltz and Marco Rubio want Ukraine to conscript more soldiers. Now they're wanting a 30-day ceasefire so Ukraine can rearm. Well, Russia is on the brink of not only taking back their territory in Kursk, but also advancing further throughout the entire front lines. So when you have a country like Ukraine, who has basically, according to the Russians anyways, this is just a Russian viewpoint, violated every agreement from Minsk I to Minsk II. In 2022, allegedly, they had violated an agreement when Boris Johnson came in and said, don't worry, we'll give you weapons. You don't have to negotiate with these guys. At that point, Russia was willing to actually go back into Russia, pull their army out of Ukraine. Okay, that was the deal that was on the table in the Istanbul talks. And now today, we are led to believe that these mediational tactics being employed by the United States, who is, of course, an active party to the conflict and can't be some third-party referee like they're trying to be, we're led to believe that the Russians are going to just accept this. It's not going to happen, okay? It's not even what you're seeing, especially right now. Consider that you just watched Moscow get attacked last night, okay? So Rubio and Waltz didn't address that at all. So what does that tell you? That tells you that it was greenlit by the US, that was actually a threat to Vladimir Putin, okay? So this is the angle that nobody else is going to tell you guys, because all of them are either sucking the teat of, the pro-Russia camp, or they're sucking the teat of that NAFO mass. I'm not going to say the word because I don't want to offend some people, but it starts with an R and it ends with Asian, okay? Fill in the blank, Asian. NAFO, Asian. NAFO supports guys getting hauled off the street against their will, kicking and screaming away from their families while their children are in tears and sent off to the front line. Illegitimately, martial law being imposed, no elections, and they have the audacity to claim that this is a democracy. These are the same people that want to take away your guns in Canada, okay? So, to spare you the loquacious, long-winded rant, I'm just going to get to the point here. This is more footage of what happened in Moscow. Now, these sites are, this is something, you know, for this to be Moscow and this happening, and these drones just to be falling indiscriminately, is a major statement from Ukraine, okay? Now, it's not uncommon for wars to ramp up in the run-up to a ceasefire. That's usually when you put it all on the table, right, as a final threat to try to force some sort of negotiation. But based on what we're hearing from the Russian Duma, from Russian pundits, to Vladimir Putin himself, what he said not too long ago, and his spokesperson today, that they're likely not going to agree to these terms, and the war is going to intensify. So that puts the United States in a position then where they then have to take some sort of punitive measures. Now, last night, here just to give you a numerical breakdown of what happened, 91 UAVs in Moscow, 126 in Kursk, 38 in Bryansk, 25 in Belgorod, Ryazan, Kaluga, all of these places, many of them are far from the front. Okay, so this was a major, major attack that had happened. This guy is referred to as Putin's brain. His daughter was assassinated by, I think it would have probably have been the SBU or elements of the SBU. Some people say it was Russian partisan groups that are affiliated loosely with Ukrainian intelligence. But Alexander Dugin says that Putin will not accept a ceasefire, as Russia many times clearly said before, without discussing the conditions of solid peace. Trump this time is wrong. No problem, that is politics. And this is the first time today all the same people who I've been saying were wrong for the longest time, don't trust this whole Trump delusion, are now finally turning on Trump, okay? Now, is that going to force Trump to change his tune? It really doesn't matter because the weapons are flowing, the intelligence is flowing to Ukraine once again, and they signed on the dotted line. So it is what it is. Now, you have Dugin turning against Trump. You have all of the, I call them the clique. They're a group of people who are like former U.S. intelligence agents who are always defending the Russian point of view. To a certain extent, I agree with a lot of what they say, but they tend to go way too far in terms of their faith in this new administration's capabilities to actually broker a deal that is going to be in all sides' interest, especially because the United States, of course, has been such a direct party to this conflict. Now, here's what Rubio and Walz had to say.
Today, we made an offer that the Ukrainians have accepted, which is to enter into a ceasefire and into immediate negotiations to end this conflict in a way that's enduring and sustainable.
Now, remember, okay, these guys did not mention at all this massive attack that happened on Moscow last night. Okay, and look at Walz grinning from ear to ear. This is the guy who wants Ukraine to not only scoop up just random Joe Schmoes off the street, but every able-bodied male over 18 in Ukraine because they want the war to keep going. They're lying to you. I've been saying this since the start. They're lying.
And it counts for their interests, their security, their ability to prosper as a nation. I want to personally thank, we both want to thank the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, His Majesty, for hosting us, for making this possible. They've been instrumental in this process. And
how is it that after Zelensky's insolent display in the Oval Office, that all of a sudden these guys have now done a complete 180 and they're buddy-buddy once again? And now it's all on Russia once again. Like, they've done a complete 180 on this issue. Yeah, Zelensky's apologizing. Okay, fine. Does that really make a difference in the grand scheme of things if the actual purpose is to end the war? Just stop sending weapons, right? Well, it's not that simple. I've been saying that the whole time, right? So this is because it's a far more complicated issue that has geopolitical ramifications that cannot be ignored and left to their own devices. If you let Russia continue to go into Ukraine and do whatever it wants, it's going to have disastrous consequences, not just for the United States, but for Europe. And I don't want that, but that's where this is going. It has to reach a point where Russia throws up some nukes and says, this is the red line. Until they do that, none of this shit's going to stop.
We're very grateful to them for hosting us here today, and hopefully we'll take this offer now to the Russians, and we hope that they'll say yes, to peace. The ball is now in their court.
They have no plan. They have no plan. All they're saying now is, will you stop, right, at the whatever dotted line in the sand? Now, it could be the case that there is some sort of secret agenda to give Russia what remains of the annexed territories. But understand that Russia has seen Ukraine violate every single agreement that has come before. Now, whether or not you agree with that is another story, but that's what they believe. So why would they believe that this time would be any different and the United States wouldn't just rearm again? Or Ukraine would just rearm again?
And but again, the president's objective here is, number one, above everything else, he wants the war to end. And I think today Ukraine has taken a concrete step in that regard. We hope the Russians will reciprocate.
Yeah, unless you're giving them something, I highly doubt it. Once again, U.S. has resumed intelligence and military aid to Ukraine. Support was unblocked after Kyiv agreed to Washington's idea for an immediate 30-day ceasefire. Okay, so you have this idea, right? Now, I don't think that Zelensky would have even been against this idea before. I can't recall exactly, but I don't think he was necessarily against the idea of a 30-day ceasefire per se. Maybe he was, but of course it depends on what that means, because of course Ukraine is in a situation now where they need time because they're the ones losing on the front line. Here's what they had to say about sending weapons and ISR back, just so there's no confusion about it.
That, and I think as a result of this positive step forward, the president has decided to lift the pause on aid and on our security assistance to Ukraine going forward. And that's effective immediately.
Okay. It's as simple as that, right? As simple as that. Now, what was the concession from Ukraine? We don't know. Give us some of your mineral rights? Here's what Lindsey Graham had to say, and this is how you know. Okay, this is how you know the whole plan. This guy spoke way too soon. I'm very encouraged to hear that Ukraine has agreed to the United States proposal for a 30-day ceasefire. Remember, a couple of years ago, Lindsey Graham was threatening to nuke Russia on Ukraine's behalf. A week ago, Lindsey Graham was basically getting on the Zelensky hate train full on and was denouncing Zelensky's display in the Oval Office and basically calling for leadership change. What is he saying today? I hope Russia will follow. If Russia refuses, we should sanction the hell out of them. He actually used the word hell. I mean, it's one thing to use more diplomatic language like we should consider imposing sanctions or something to that extent. I will be introducing congressionally mandated sanctions that will not only impact Russia, but will also impose sanctions and tariffs on countries that buy Russian goods. So we're right back to where we were. The same old Lindsey Graham comes out, right? The mask comes off. I'm telling you, this is mask off week. And right now, Trump is so preoccupied with trying to save Tesla stock and try to de-escalate the trade war that he started that they might actually just slip this by people. And for all we know, we're going to be back to McCarthyism once again, full blown. MAGA's going to turn anti-Russia. And that's always kind of permeating under the surface, and it's percolating there. And eventually, you know, it comes out with a vengeance, because that's been deeply indoctrinated into people, the Russophobic hate. And all that has to happen is maybe a little false flag here and there, and Russia, you know, failing to meet Trump's magnanimous proposal and be unaccommodating in their and uncompromising in their peace talks. And that's all it's going to take. And then, you know, here we are back again, back to square one. Only this time, it's much, much worse. Because now there is no prospect for peace, right? Because then you're in a situation where, well, the Biden play is the same as the Trump play, and we all know what the inevitable result of the Biden play would have been. It would have been nuclear annihilation. And so it appears as though that's where it's heading. Now, the Kremlin had also warned of fake news amid peace talks. And they've been incredibly prudent in terms of their measured response to all this. They're not getting excited about it. They're not saying anything about it. They're taking the opposite approach of the United States, who seems to utilize equivocation, and they attempt to try to create so much strategic ambiguity that the messages just become white noise. And the Russians take the opposite approach. They just don't say anything, right? They say, okay, these are things that will have to be looked at and talked about behind closed doors. Now, the Russian Duma deputy, Viktor Sobolev, has said that Russia will not agree to a 30-day ceasefire since it will only allow for Ukraine to regroup and rearm. A temporary ceasefire is unacceptable. So here's the other problem. Even if Putin wants to play some 4D chess with this maneuver and buy himself some more time, there are people within his own government that will very likely reject the idea, especially considering Russia is on the brink of winning on numerous places throughout the map. Now, it could have been the case that maybe Ukraine threw the fight in Kursk, and again, maybe this is all a ploy to give the Russians everything east of the river, and they both go their separate ways, and Zelensky makes it look like they were forced back, or they just get people to concede that that's what's going to have to be, concessions that are going to have to be made. And maybe that's what's happening here, but it doesn't look like it. It looks like what I've said all along, that this thing is going to escalate. And as soon as you cross that point where the well-meaning of Trump is basically up against the red lines of Russia, which is what we're at this week, and if we cannot get behind this great filter, so to speak, then I think things spiral out of control really, really fast, and all bets are off. Okay, so this is Zelensky with his plea to the White House, once again saying that we want peace, we want peace. Now, this is what Vladimir Putin said about a year ago. He said, the preconditions for any sort of peace talks are simple. Ukrainian troops must be completely withdrawn from Donetsk, Lugansk republics, as well as Kherson and Zaporozhye regions. I want to emphasize from the entire territory of these regions within their administrative borders as they existed at the time they joined Ukraine. Ukraine still occupies a fairly sizable chunk of these various oblasts. As soon as Kyiv announces that it's ready for such a decision and begins the actual withdrawal of troops from these regions, and also officially notifies us of its renunciation of the plans to join NATO. And that really is more boilerplate stuff, because at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter what Ukraine says. If you're getting peacekeeping troops in there and you're getting unofficial security guarantees from the United States, you're de facto NATO state. So that one is really just for bragging rights and doesn't actually have any pragmatic utility to it. An order will immediately follow from our side to cease fire and begin negotiations. Okay, I repeat, we will do this immediately. Naturally, we will simultaneously guarantee the unhindered and safe withdrawal of Ukrainian units and formations. So, Putin is saying, all you got to do is get the hell out of the 4 annexed territories and renounce your desire to join NATO, and then everything will be fine. It sounds like, by the sounds of things, I mean, this was before the peacekeepers became one of the red lines, but it sounds like they might even be okay with having peacekeepers there. you know, knowing full well that they have no intention of going further, at least, you know, initially, of course, they did. And historically, when they've had their own puppet governments in power, they've been able to have dominion over the entire country. But it sounds like, if we take Putin on his word, that they will actually honor a ceasefire. Now, will they continue to rearm? Will they continue to try to undermine whatever sort of government exists in Ukraine? And will there continue to be gray zone asymmetrical warfare happening? I get that there probably will be. However, you know, that could be a potential starting point. But again, that is not something that Ukraine has agreed to. And yet they already have had the recommencement of weapon shipments. You would think that the United States would try to hamstring Ukraine a little bit more and say, we're only giving you weapons if you agree to pull back to the lines. Because that, of course, would be to agree to Vladimir Putin's terms. And if Trump was serious about ending the war and was serious about it being a military dictatorship and it not being democratic and Zelensky needs to go and all of this other rhetoric that we've heard, which is really just amounted to bluster, then he should have been able to strong-arm Zelensky into accepting those terms, or they could have walked away. Now, the other possibility here is that the United States started to see Europe coming together in support of Ukraine, and they were actually scared that they were going to be completely cut out of this altogether. That is a possibility as well, and so maybe they made Zelensky a slightly better deal and they had to make concessions. Now that puts them in an impasse with Russia. Representatives from over 30 countries participated today in negotiations to put peacekeepers in Ukraine. Okay, so it's well beyond the hypothetical stage and they're in the planning phase. As I reported yesterday, the U.S. is set to house nuclear weapons in Britain for the first time in decades. 22 nuclear bunkers are currently being renovated, and these bunkers have been surveilled by Russian drones as well as many other military critical infrastructure throughout Europe. There was, in addition to the flurry of drone strikes throughout Russia yesterday, one of which struck a Druzhba pipeline, which is one of the last functional pipelines going into through Ukraine, and this supplies Hungary, I believe, and many other countries with a lot of oil and gas. Is this one oil? I can't remember. Is the Druzhba oil or gas? Either way, it was temporarily shut down. It's back again operational. But Hungary was actually making a veiled threat towards the rest of NATO in a way that they actually took this as something which could potentially have triggered Article 5, but in the direction of Ukraine. So basically enacting Article 5 against Ukraine for permitting this attack on the Druzhba pipeline, because the Ukrainians attacked the Russian pipeline that gives Hungary gas. So using that as something which could potentially trigger Article 5, not against Russia per se, but against Ukraine. Wouldn't that be a wild plot twist? Pezeshkian, the Iranian leader, had some interesting words for Donald Trump today. He basically said, and I quote, "I will not negotiate with you, even under threat. Do whatever you want. We do not want to quarrel with anyone, but we will not bow to others. We die, but we will not live in humiliation. What they did to Zelensky was shameful." So those are fighting words. So basically what this means is that Israel and the United States are probably going to try to attack Iranian nuclear facilities, and the only way they do that is probably with nuclear weapons. Because these bunker busters that they have, they're not going to go deep enough and they're not going to be impactful enough. Some people claim they will, but I mean, you're going to have to get some big bombers in there, the biggest bombers that they can bring in order to drop bombs big enough that will even have a chance in hell of getting deep enough to target these centrifuges, 13,000 of them throughout Iran. And then, of course, you have air defense to contend with. And it's going to be a big deal, okay? I'm not going to get too much into the trade war, both Trump and Ford kind of backed down a bit today. People are chalking it up to, you know, it's a Trump win and Canada backed down. Look, as I've said from the beginning, the Liberals want tariffs. It's good for them in the polls. They will ride this tariff thing out. They will shoot themselves in each foot multiple times over if it means that they can stay in power. Canada does not fear the repercussions of tariffs. What likely happened was the same thing that happened when Trump postponed it once and postponed it again, is that they backed down, okay? Because they realized that this is having not only a detrimental effect against the stock market, but that Canada is actually more than happy to leverage this border dispute to the benefit of them politically. So that's where the whole plan kind of backfires, is that they underestimate the ability that political parties will go to and how low they will go to basically stay in control. This was kind of pathetic today, I thought. You know, it's one thing to embrace American ingenuity. There's something about this, though, that was just very strange. Tesla, if you didn't know, has lost 50% of its value, hundreds of billions of dollars just gone, okay? It used to be one of the big seven. It's not even one of the big seven anymore. And that's a bad thing for Elon Musk. And unfortunately, people are buying less Teslas. They're being lit on fire throughout the entirety of the country. I now view my Tesla as a security risk, to be brutally honest, because they're getting vandalized, especially the Cybertruck. It's unfortunate because I've always been a proponent of the technology. I've always been an admirer of the ingenuity of Tesla, not necessarily Elon Musk, but as a visionary, as a technological visionary, I appreciate Elon Musk. But the guy just talks too damn much, and they overplayed their hand. None of this would be happening if he would just shut the hell up. Plain and simple. You can do all the stuff you do he could have done all that stuff in Doge, but it's the other shit that he goes on about 24/7 on Twitter that just pisses people off. And so this is what you expect. And unfortunately, despite the President of the United States of America coming to your aid and basically saying that we're going to designate anybody who commits vandalism against a Tesla a domestic terrorist, and despite buying a Tesla, being wowed by the technology, which is 10 years old. It was funny seeing him realize that it's only a computer in there. That was kind of cute. But, you know, it only moved the needle of Tesla stock barely a few percentage points. And that's, you know, even if this display, which is totally a conflict of interest in every possible way, maybe not legally, but this is the worst conflict of interest I've ever seen. I mean, think about what's happening here, okay? They're trying to essentially pump the stock in the same way they pumped Trump and Melania coin. And it didn't do anything, okay? And this is on a day when markets they didn't really rebound. They actually still declined. They ended the day in the negative. But this on a day after one of the worst wipeouts since 2020, definitely the worst wipeout, and numerically speaking, much greater numbers. And interestingly, I was looking at Truth Social yesterday, and throughout that entire market crash, Donald Trump, or whoever is running this account, it's not Trump doing this, somebody else is running his account. They must have ran, I mean, just countless amounts of posts, hundreds of posts within the span of a few hours that this whole thing was starting to collapse, which makes me think that this was purely a diversionary tactic. And that's why I believe that they will likely take this market to the bottom if they have to, okay? So get ready, buckle up. World War III is still very much hanging in the balance, and the markets are still crashing. If you want to support this channel, I would encourage you to check out CanadianPreparedness.com. I don't do ads within the videos, as you've known. Yes, there's YouTube ads, but we don't do paid sponsorships in these videos. I choose instead to try to my own detriment, I should add, because if I was to just put paid sponsors in these videos, it would be a lot less headache and I'd make a lot more money. But instead, because I'm a believer in what I say, I practice what I preach, and I pride myself on distributing high-quality gear that's actually going to work when you need it, food that's actually going to taste good and last a long time. Well, we have a store, and that's where you can go and gear up if you want. If not, then just do me a favor and click like and even share the video. I hope you found this somewhat valuable. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Blah, 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 blah.